Imagine if I shared with you that a single individual in the ancient world accomplished something so remarkable that the Almighty determined death would not be his fate. In an era overtaken by evil, where brutality covered the planet and people had turned away from their Maker, one man lived in such a way that pleased the divine, causing him to disappear from reality, not by dying, but through heavenly intervention. This tells the account of Enoch, seventh in line from Adam, whose relationship with the divine was so profound that following 365 years of earthly existence, the Almighty brought him home, never experiencing mortality. His existence contains prophetic revelations that open up secrets regarding our everlasting future and shows us the genuine meaning of maintaining intimate communion with the divine. Get ready to uncover how a single person's belief transformed everything and understand why his account resonates throughout all time as a symbol of hope for everyone seeking communion with their Maker. The account starts with a holy bloodline extending back to humanity's very dawn. After Adam and Eve's son Abel fell victim to his brother's envious fury, the divine blessed them with yet another son. Genesis chapter 4, verse 25, records that Adam was intimate with his wife once more, and she gave birth to a son, naming him Seth. She declared, "The Almighty has given me another offspring in place of Abel, who was slain by Cain." This represented more than simply another child being born. It marked the start of a sacred ancestry that would preserve the light of godliness through humanity's bleakest periods. Seth's line produced men who made the choice to invoke their Lord's name. Genesis chapter 4, verse 26 shows us that Seth too had a son born to him, whom he called Enoch. At that time, people started calling upon their Lord's name. These individuals weren't flawless, yet they were searchers, fathers, passing along not merely property and titles, but conviction and reverence for the divine. They came together for worship, for prayer, for keeping alive the covenant promises made to their forefathers. The holy writings in Genesis's 5th chapter reveal themselves like a precious thread winding through the ages. This records the ancestral line of Adam. When the Creator formed mankind, he fashioned him in his divine image. Male and female he formed them, blessing them and naming them humanity on the day of their formation. Adam's line led to Seth. Seth brought forth Enoch. Enoch fathered Kenan. Kenan produced Mahalalel. Mahalalel became father to Jared. Every successive generation preserved something invaluable: understanding of the divine and the covenant of his closeness. These individuals experienced remarkably extended lifespans, some approaching a millennium. Adam's own years reached 930, sufficient time to witness 9 successive generations of his offspring inhabit the planet. Seth's lifespan reached 912 years, observing the world's transformation surrounding him from a state of purity to one of increasing corruption. Enoch walked the earth 905 years. Kenan's life spanned 910 years. Mahalalel existed for 895 years. They stood as observers to hundreds of years of mankind's journey, preservers of humanity's earliest narratives, protectors of the belief system handed down from the beginning itself. Throughout these extended years, these ancient fathers enjoyed endless chances to transmit their convictions. They didn't merely share accounts on a single occasion. They recounted them repeatedly, year upon year, across successive generations. Someone living 9 centuries could directly instruct his descendants, several generations removed, about the Creator who formed their ancestors. They served as living archives of heavenly wisdom, breathing proof of divine reliability across the centuries. Every designation within this family record speaks to belief and expectation. Adam signifies humanity or humankind, calling to mind our collective nature and our requirement for the divine. Seth signifies appointed or bestowed, demonstrating mercy and favor following Abel's terrible death. Enoch signifies mortal or fragile, recognizing human frailty and reliance upon the Creator. Kenan signifies possession or obtained, referring to divine provisions and favor. Mahalalel signifies the praise of the Almighty, indicating that adoration was fundamental to their existence and character. These designations weren't selected without purpose. They served as affirmations of trust, expectation, and reliance upon the Creator. Each time fathers spoke their sons' names, they recalled divine nature and covenant promises. Whenever the people assembled and these names were voiced, they engaged in living witness to divine goodness and constancy through successive generations. Next arrived Jared, whose designation signifies descent or coming down. His years numbered 962, among the most extended lifespans documented throughout human records. Genesis chapter 5 verse 15 records that Mahalalel reached 65 years and fathered Jared. At Jared's arrival, creation already displayed evidence of the spiritual deterioration that would ultimately result in the catastrophic deluge. Still, amid expanding shadow, the divine was orchestrating something remarkable. Jared witnessed centuries of mankind's unfolding story. He observed magnificent cities arising, technological progress emerging, expanding human understanding and abilities. However, he likewise observed the progressive abandonment of the divine occurring throughout much of civilization. He saw increasing numbers choosing existence as though the Creator were absent, as though they controlled their own destinies. Genesis chapter 5 verse 18 records that Jared reached 162 years and fathered Enoch. At 162 years of age, still youthful by that era's measures, he welcomed a son who would alter everything. This infant would prove unlike all his predecessors. Something extraordinary marked this child from his initial breath. The seventh successive generation carries particular importance throughout holy writings. 7 represents divine completion and wholeness. From Adam, the generations descended. Adam, Seth, Enoch, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, then Enoch. He stood 7th from Adam, occupying a position of spiritual importance that would characterize his complete existence. The Almighty had been orchestrating creation for this instant, for this individual, for this singular bond that would emerge. As Jared cradled his infant son, he selected a designation proving prophetic in nature. He named him Enoch, which in the Hebrew tongue signifies dedicated, initiated, or instructed. This choice wasn't made lightly. In those times, designations possessed tremendous significance and weight. They communicated destiny, divine calling, parental aspirations and visions for their offspring's path ahead. Jared, possibly perceiving something divinely ordained regarding his son's purpose, bestowed upon him a designation declaring his consecration to the Almighty before speech was possible. Enoch's designation's significance would resonate throughout his complete lifetime. Dedication indicated separation for unique purpose, distinction from common life pursuits to concentrate on eternal matters. Initiation indicated entry into sacred understanding and communion, welcoming into secrets beyond others' comprehension. Training indicated preparation and equipping for something surpassing ordinary existence, readiness for heavenly purpose. From his birth moment onward, Enoch carried a designation whispering of his remarkable fate. Whenever anyone spoke his name, they proclaimed this individual as one consecrated to the divine, brought into heavenly secrets, prepared for purpose that would amaze creation. His designation served as prophecy that would manifest throughout his exceptional lifetime. However, Enoch didn't enter a realm of harmony and godliness. Creation was transforming into a war zone between righteousness and wickedness, between those remembering the Almighty and those completely forgetting him. While Seth's offspring worked to revere their Lord, another bloodline expanded with strength and brutality. Cain's line, beginning with the original killer. The division between these families would form the reality Enoch matured within. The spiritual atmosphere during Enoch's era exhibited mounting shadow and ethical deterioration. Genesis chapter 6 verse 5 would subsequently characterize this time. Then, their Lord recognized that humanity's corruption was extensive upon the planet and that every motivation of their heart's intentions was exclusively wicked without ceasing. This wasn't a reality where wrongdoing remained concealed or uncommon. This was a reality where corruption had become standard, where humanity had rejected their maker. Brutality was spreading throughout creation. Genesis chapter 6, verse 11, records that the planet likewise stood corrupted before the divine, and creation was saturated with brutality. This wasn't merely sporadic disagreement. This was reality, where power determined justice, where strength oppressed weakness, where individuals seized desires without consideration for fairness or compassion. The very bedrock of organized community was disintegrating beneath humanity's transgression and defiance. Still, amid this expanding shadow, a faithful remnant persisted. Seth's offspring persisted in invoking their Lord's name, in worshipping him, in pursuing his presence. They resembled illumination-piercing shadow, maintaining truth while surrounding masses embraced deception. They served as protectors of conviction in a generation without faith, preservers of expectation in a world without hope. Into this spiritual conflict zone, this reality of mounting darkness and diminishing light, young Enoch arrived. He would mature, observing the division between righteousness and wickedness, between divine lovers and divine haters. This setting would mold his nature, fortify his conviction, and ready him for the remarkable communion with the Almighty awaiting him. The reality Enoch stepped into stood at a pivotal moment. On one path, Seth's offspring preserved their commitment to the divine, assembling consistently for worship, prayer, and remembering accounts of formation, humanity's downfall, and divine covenant promises. They maintained uncomplicated existences centered on kinship, conviction, and communion with their Maker. These individuals grasped that existence held significance, transcending the material realm, that higher purpose existed beyond individual satisfaction or worldly achievement. On the opposite path, Cain's offspring had constructed a society founded upon human accomplishment and independence. They had produced exquisite melodies, striking structures, and sophisticated innovations. Their urban centers hummed with movement and advancement. Yet despite their achievements, they had lost sight of the one providing them with creative and constructive abilities. They existed as though they were divine beings, controllers of their own fate. This represented the reality that would form young Enoch's comprehension of righteousness and wickedness, of correct and incorrect, of the everlasting contrasted with the fleeting. He would mature, observing these two lifestyle approaches existing simultaneously, witnessing each choice's outcomes, developing discernment between divine wisdom and human foolishness. His era's spiritual atmosphere would serve as the setting against which his own remarkable account would emerge in approaching times. The division between Seth's offspring and Cain's ancestry grew increasingly pronounced with every succeeding generation. Though both bloodlines originated from Adam, they had selected vastly contrasting directions. Cain's offspring had constructed creation's initial urban centers and achieved exceptional progress in innovation and civilization. Genesis chapter 4, verses 20 through 22, reveal their accomplishments. Jabal became the ancestor of tent dwellers who kept livestock. His sibling was named Jubal, who became the ancestor of all who perform on stringed instruments and wind instruments. Regarding Zillah, she likewise gave birth to Tubal-Cain, who taught every artisan working with bronze and iron. These individuals weren't uncomplicated people, maintaining uncomplicated existences. They had cultivated music, producing exquisite harmonies capable of stirring emotions and touching spirits. They had achieved mastery over metalcraft, creating implements and armaments, granting them dominance over their surroundings. They had mastered animal domestication and had created productive living methods, enabling wealth accumulation and magnificent city construction. They served as the pioneers, the creative minds, the skilled workers who formed early human civilization. Still, despite their accomplishments, Cain's bloodline lacked something essential. They possessed understanding, yet lacked wisdom. They wielded power, yet knew no tranquility. They celebrated achievements, yet found no enduring happiness. Most crucially, they maintained no communion with their Maker. They existed as though the divine were absent, as though they commanded their own destinies, as though this realm represented everything. Their urban centers overflowed with brutality and moral decay. Their spirits hardened through arrogance and self-sufficiency. In sharp opposition, Seth's offspring had selected an entirely different direction. They gained recognition throughout creation as those invoking their Lord's designation. Their existences demonstrated not magnificent structures or innovative progress, but conviction, adoration, and consecration to the Almighty. They congregated consistently for prayer, for singing, for remembering formation accounts and divine covenant promises. They existed understanding this realm's temporary nature, that their genuine dwelling place remained with the divine. While Cain's offspring placed confidence in their personal power and understanding, Seth's bloodline recognized their reliance upon the Creator. They grasped they were formed beings, not autonomous deities. They comprehended their capabilities and blessings originated from the Almighty, and they maintained thankful spirits. They transmitted not merely functional abilities to their offspring, but spiritual realities, ethical principles, and understanding of divine nature and methods. Into this reality of opposing forces, young Enoch arrived and started maturing. As a youth, he observed these two lifestyle approaches with inquisitive observation. He witnessed how Cain's offspring existed for immediate gratification, pursuing enjoyment and dominance and material goods. He noted how they appeared to possess everything, yet remained perpetually dissatisfied, constantly grasping for more, perpetually struggling for dominance, perpetually seeking the subsequent achievement or victory. However, within his personal family, Enoch observed something contrasting. Despite maintaining simpler existences, despite possessing fewer material goods, despite receiving scorn from the world, they possessed something the others lacked: tranquility, happiness, meaning, and most significantly, divine presence. They understood they were cherished, they recognized they held purpose, they grasped they were participants in a narrative transcending themselves. Enoch's formative years involved learning not merely functional abilities like agricultural work and skilled trades, but spiritual realities that would form his complete lifetime. His father Jared shared accounts with him of Adam and Eve, of the paradise, of humanity's downfall, of the divine promise regarding a future deliverer. His grandfather Mahalalel instructed him concerning worship, concerning prayer, concerning the significance of invoking their Lord's designation. His great-grandfather Kenan shared recollections of the initial period when creation was fresher and humanity existed even nearer to the original formation. These weren't merely ancient tales to young Enoch. They represented living truth. Adam remained alive throughout Enoch's formative period, a breathing testament to humanity's beginnings and the divine's original design. Enoch potentially could have encountered the initial man directly, learning from him personally regarding the paradise, regarding the tree bringing life, regarding the time when the divine communed with humanity in the evening's coolness. Consider the influence of receiving first-hand testimony from someone who had genuinely walked alongside the Almighty in paradise. As Enoch transitioned from youth to young adulthood, something started awakening within his spirit. While other youths his age concentrated on construction, agriculture, and conflict, Enoch discovered himself attracted to something more profound. He would travel alone to peaceful locations, contemplating the divine, pondering the accounts his father shared, experiencing attraction towards something he couldn't yet identify. His soul harbored a yearning that worldly matters couldn't fulfill. He started comprehending that his heart's restlessness wasn't an issue requiring resolution, but a summons requiring response. While his peers remained satisfied with earthly endeavors, Enoch perceived something additional existed, something everlasting, something that would survive all the accomplishments and possessions that individuals struggled so intensely to acquire. He wasn't content with second-hand knowledge about the Almighty. He desired to know the divine personally, intimately, directly. The young individual started dedicating increased time to prayer, increased time to contemplation, increased time pursuing understanding of the Creator his ancestors had honored. He would awaken during early morning hours to spend time privately with his contemplations and prayers before commencing his daily labor. He would interrupt throughout each day to express gratitude and request direction. He would conclude each day contemplating divine goodness and reliability. Prayer wasn't merely something Enoch performed, it was transforming into his lifestyle approach. Individuals surrounding Enoch started recognizing something distinctive about him. While others, his age concentrated on amassing riches, establishing reputations, or obtaining influence, Enoch appeared to be pursuing something completely contrasting. He possessed tranquility about him that others couldn't comprehend, happiness that didn't rely upon situations, wisdom that appeared to originate from somewhere transcending this realm. Something regarding his presence provided comfort to distressed spirits and understanding to bewildered minds. His family observed as this young individual developed in spiritual development with every passing year. They witnessed how he engaged others with gentleness and empathy, how he articulated words of reality and support, how he appeared to transport divine presence wherever he traveled. Even those not sharing his conviction could recognize that Enoch was distinctive. Something about him attracted individuals to him, something that created desire to receive his words. The shift from common existence to remarkable communion with the divine didn't occur instantaneously. It was a progressive transformation, like the gradual sunrise of a fresh day. Enoch was developing the ability to differentiate between divine voice and worldly disturbance, between matters of importance and matters of insignificance, between the fleeting and the everlasting. Day after day, month after month, year after year, his spirit was receiving preparation for something remarkable. As Enoch developed, he started grasping more distinctly what his designation signified. He genuinely was transforming into someone consecrated to the divine, distinguished from the common endeavors that dominated most individuals. He was receiving initiation into heavenly secrets, obtaining revelations and comprehension that arrived exclusively through intimate communion with the Maker. He was receiving instruction for purpose that surpassed anything he could have conceived. The pivotal moment arrived progressively, like sunrise emerging beyond the mountain peaks. It wasn't an instantaneous instant, but a gradual awakening, an expanding awareness that the divine was summoning him to something greater. Enoch started comprehending that his designation wasn't merely an identifier, but a summons. That consecration to the Almighty signified more than merely having belief in him. It signified existing for him entirely, relinquishing every dimension of his existence to the Maker's intention and calling. At some moment, during his early mature life, Enoch reached a decision that would distinguish him from every other individual who had ever existed. He determined that knowledge about the divine wasn't sufficient. He desired to know the Almighty personally, intimately, as companions know one another. He selected to respond entirely to that attraction within his spirit, to advance from the common into the remarkable. This wasn't concerning religious practice or ceremony or adhering to regulations. This concerned relationship, concerning companionship, concerning two beings journeying together in absolute unity. And then the moment arrived, the instant that would transform everything. The instant when Enoch initially started journeying with the divine. Genesis chapter 5 verse 22 documents this incredible milestone. Following the birth of Methuselah, Enoch journeyed with the Almighty 300 years and fathered additional sons and daughters. However, this journeying with the divine didn't commence abruptly. It originated with that initial movement, that initial instant, when Enoch selected to advance beyond simple belief into active, intimate communion with his Maker. When Enoch advanced that initial step toward the divine, he uncovered something astonishing. The Almighty was already advancing toward him. The creator of all existence, the one who had shaped humanity from Earth's dust, was enthusiastic to journey with this young individual who had selected to pursue him with complete devotion. In that instant, Enoch stepped into a bond that no human being had previously encountered. He started journeying with the divine, not merely spiritually, but actually personally, intimately. The foundation was established for the most exceptional bond in mankind's story. This represented the start of something unprecedented in human chronicles. A man journeying with the Almighty in absolute communion, absolute fellowship, absolute unity. Enoch had entered a realm of connection with the Creator that would revolutionize not merely his personal existence, but would function as witness to all successive generations of what it signifies to genuinely journey with the divine. The remarkable voyage had commenced. Journeying with the divine was unlike anything creation had previously witnessed. When the holy writings declare that Enoch journeyed with the Almighty, they're characterizing something far transcending what we might envision. This wasn't merely praying or having belief. This was genuine physical, personal communion between humanity and its maker. Envision two companions taking a walk together, conversing, exchanging ideas, delighting in one another's presence. That's what transpired between Enoch and the divine, except this companionship existed between the limitless creator and a limited man. The Hebrew term employed for walked in Genesis chapter 5 verse 22 is the identical term employed to characterize common walking, the manner you perform daily. However, when it declares Enoch journeyed with the Almighty, it signifies he actually walked beside the Creator. The divine would manifest to Enoch in some perceptible form, and together they would journey and converse as companions. This wasn't an apparition or a sleeping vision. This was genuine physical communion that transpired day following day, year following year. Envision what those exchanges must have resembled. Enoch could inquire of the divine anything regarding formation, regarding the future, regarding the universe's secrets. The Almighty would reveal his spirit with Enoch, unveiling his intentions, his apprehensions, his affection for humanity. They would examine the expanding corruption in creation, the approaching verdict, and the divine's supreme design for deliverance. These weren't momentary encounters, but prolonged periods of intimate communion that intensified their bond. This journeying with the divine distinguished Enoch from every other individual who had previously existed. Even Adam, who had journeyed with the divine in the paradise, had forfeited that privilege through transgression. However, Enoch had discovered his path back into that manner of intimate connection with his Maker. He had uncovered what every human spirit was fashioned for: absolute communion with the divine. This wasn't merely a religious encounter, but a living, breathing companionship with the Most High. As Enoch's bond with the Almighty intensified, something exceptional started transpiring. The divine started unveiling to him matters that were concealed from others. Enoch started perceiving creation through divine perspective, to comprehend spiritual realities that transcended human understanding. He obtained revelations regarding the past, present, and future that would form not merely his personal existence, but the existences of everyone surrounding him. The Almighty summoned Enoch to transform into his representative to creation. In the book of Jude, verse 14, we discover that Enoch, seventh from Adam, delivered prophecies regarding these individuals. He wasn't merely a man who journeyed with the divine for his personal advantage. He was appointed as a prophet, a messenger of godliness, to a reality that was swiftly losing sight of its maker. The divine had selected him to serve as his voice in a generation that urgently required hearing truth. Enoch's function as a prophet wasn't simple. He was summoned to articulate uncomfortable realities to individuals who didn't desire to receive them. He had to caution a pleasure-pursuing, brutal generation regarding approaching verdict. He had to summon people to turning away from sin when they were persuaded they didn't require the divine. He had to advocate for godliness in a reality that had predominantly forsaken divine methods. However, Enoch wasn't delivering his personal concepts or perspectives. Everything he articulated arrived directly from his exchanges with the divine. When he addressed verdict, it was because the Almighty had revealed to him what was approaching. When he summoned people to godliness, it was because the divine had disclosed his requirements to him. When he cautioned regarding outcomes, it was because the Almighty had clarified those outcomes throughout their journeys together. The declaration Enoch delivered was both frightening and promising. Jude, verses 14 and 15, document his prophecy. Behold, the Lord arrives with tens of thousands of his holy ones to carry out verdict upon all, to declare guilty all who are ungodly among them of all their ungodly actions which they have performed in an ungodly manner, and of all the severe words which ungodly transgressors have uttered against him. This wasn't merely regarding the deluge that was approaching in Noah's period. This was regarding the supreme verdict when the Lord himself would come back to creation. Enoch perceived something that wouldn't transpire for thousands of years: the second arrival of Jesus Christ. He perceived the Lord coming back with his holy ones, arriving to render verdict upon the planet and establish his dominion. He perceived the conclusion of human defiance and the commencement of the divine's everlasting sovereignty. This vision wasn't merely for his personal comprehension, but was intended to be conveyed with the reality of his era. His prophecies illustrated an image of a holy creator who would not permit transgression indefinitely. He articulated a time when every ungodly action would be revealed, when every severe utterance spoken against the divine would be addressed, when all defiance would be held accountable. However, his declaration likewise conveyed expectation. The Lord was arriving not merely to render verdict, but to establish godliness and tranquility upon the planet. The individuals of Enoch's period required hearing this declaration urgently. They were existing as though there would never be any outcomes for their behaviors. They ridiculed the concept of divine verdict and existed exclusively for immediate satisfaction and profit. Enoch's prophecy functioned as an awakening summons, a final caution that divine patience had boundaries and that a day of accounting was certainly approaching. Then something transpired that would provide even greater significance to Enoch's prophetic calling. Genesis chapter 5, verse 21, records that Enoch reached 65 years and fathered Methuselah. The arrival of his son would demonstrate to be one of the most important instances in human chronicles, not merely because of who Methuselah would transform into, but because of what his designation prophetically proclaimed to creation. When Enoch designated his son Methuselah, he wasn't merely selecting an appealing-sounding designation. The designation Methuselah signifies when he perishes, it shall arrive, or when he is deceased, it shall be dispatched. This wasn't happenstance, it was prophecy. The divine had disclosed to Enoch that when this child perished, divine verdict would arrive upon the planet. The very designation of Enoch's son was a walking, speaking prophecy of the approaching deluge. Consider what this signified for Enoch as a father. Every time he spoke his son's designation, he was reminded of the approaching verdict. Every anniversary, every significant moment in Methuselah's existence was a countdown to the greatest catastrophe creation had previously witnessed. Still, this understanding likewise signified that the divine was providing humanity time. As long as Methuselah existed, there remained still chance for turning from sin. The arrival of Methuselah indicated a pivotal moment in Enoch's existence and calling. From this instant onward, he possessed a living, breathing testament of divine fairness and compassion. His son's very being was evidence that divine declarations were accurate, that verdict was approaching, but that the Almighty was patient and forbearing, not desiring that any should be destroyed, but that all should arrive at turning from sin. Methuselah would proceed to exist 969 years, more extended than any other human being in documented chronicles. Every year of his extended existence was a year of favor, a year when individuals could have turned from their corruption and discovered pardon. However, as we understand from the account of Noah, most individuals disregarded the caution. They persisted in their defiance right up until the time the deluge arrived and carried them all away. The prophetic importance of Methuselah's designation would have been evident to anyone who understood Enoch's standing as a prophet. Here was an individual who journeyed and conversed with the divine, who had demonstrated his capacity to receive from heaven, bestowing his son a designation that proclaimed approaching verdict. This wasn't merely a forecast, it was a divine proclamation conveyed through the most intimate of family connections. For Enoch, possessing a son whose designation proclaimed the divine's approaching verdict added a fresh aspect to his prophetic summons. He wasn't merely delivering messages regarding abstract future occurrences. He was nurturing a child whose very being counted down to those occurrences. Every day he dedicated with Methuselah was a testament that divine designs were manifesting precisely as he had disclosed them. The designation Methuselah likewise functioned as a powerful evangelistic instrument in Enoch's calling. When individuals inquired regarding his son's distinctive designation, Enoch possessed the ideal chance to convey the divine's declaration of both caution and compassion. He could clarify that the Almighty had revealed to him an approaching verdict, but that the divine spirit was to deliver, not obliterate. The very reality that the divine had provided them this advance, caution demonstrated his wish for individuals to turn from sin and be delivered. As information circulated regarding the significance of Methuselah's designation, it would have generated considerable disturbance in the community. Some individuals might have ridiculed and rejected it as irrational belief, but others would have been profoundly disturbed. Here was an individual recognized for his intimate bond with the divine, bestowing his son a designation that forecast the conclusion of the reality as they understood it. This wasn't something that could be readily disregarded or erased from memory. The arrival of Methuselah likewise indicated the commencement of a fresh stage in Enoch's bond with the divine. Genesis chapter 5, verse 22. Particularly mentions that following the birth of Methuselah, Enoch journeyed with the Almighty 300 years. This indicates that while Enoch had consistently maintained closeness to the divine, something substantial transformed following his son's arrival. His journeying with the Almighty grew even more concentrated, more regular, more intimate. Perhaps the responsibility of nurturing a child whose designation proclaimed approaching verdict propelled Enoch to pursue divine presence even more fervently. Or perhaps the Almighty selected this instant to intensify their bond, because Enoch now possessed direct comprehension of what it signified to be a father, granting him fresh perspective into the divine spirit for his offspring. Whatever the explanation, the arrival of Methuselah introduced 3 centuries of unparalleled communion between humanity and its maker. This amplified bond with the divine would form everything regarding Enoch's existence and calling moving forward. The individual who had already been journeying with the Almighty would now encounter an even more profound level of divine communion. The prophet who had already been articulating divine declarations would now obtain even more significant revelations. Genesis chapter 5, verse 22, discloses something remarkable regarding the subsequent stage of Enoch's existence. Following the birth of Methuselah, Enoch journeyed with the Almighty 300 years and fathered additional sons and daughters, 300 years of journeying with the divine. Can you envision what that must have resembled? This wasn't sporadic communion or irregular encounters. This was 3 centuries of daily intimate fellowship between humanity and its maker. Throughout these 300 years, Enoch's bond with the divine achieved depths that no human being had previously encountered. Each day delivered fresh exchanges, fresh revelations, fresh perspectives into the spirit and understanding of the Creator. While other individuals were occupied with their daily matters, constructing, cultivating, nurturing families, Enoch was journeying with the universe's maker, discovering matters that worldly understanding could never instruct. Consider how much can transpire in 300 years. Kingdoms could ascend and collapse, complete generations could arrive and depart. Creation could transform entirely. However, through all these centuries, one matter remained unchanging. Enoch journeyed with the divine day following day, year following year, decade following decade. This exceptional communion persisted uninterrupted. It was the characterizing feature of Enoch's existence. This prolonged period of divine fellowship wasn't merely for Enoch's personal advantage. The Almighty was equipping him for a calling that would influence not merely his personal generation, but all of human chronicles. The revelations he obtained during these journeys would form his declaration to creation. The understanding he acquired would enable him to perceive through the falsehoods of his period and articulate divine truth with absolute precision and power. As the years advanced and Enoch's communion with the divine intensified, his prophetic calling grew more pressing and more forceful. He wasn't merely articulating abstract future occurrences anymore. He was conveying particular, detailed cautions regarding the verdict that was approaching. His declaration grew more focused, more straightforward, more impossible to disregard. Enoch's cautions to the corrupt generation weren't conveyed in a spirit of animosity or denunciation. They arrived from a spirit that had been affected by the divine's personal sorrow over human defiance. Throughout his journeys with the Almighty, Enoch had witnessed how profoundly transgression saddened the Maker's spirit. Genesis chapter 6 verse 6 records that the Lord regretted that he had formed humanity on the planet, and he was sorrowful in his spirit. Enoch had observed this divine anguish directly. The declaration Enoch delivered was both frightening and compassionate. Yes, verdict was approaching. That was inevitable. The deluge would certainly obliterate the corrupt reality. However, there remained still time for turning from sin, still chance for individuals to abandon their wicked methods and discover pardon. Every message Enoch delivered, every caution he conveyed, was genuinely an offer toward deliverance. His cautions weren't unclear dangers, but particular revelations of what the divine had revealed to him. He could characterize the approaching deluge in detail because the Almighty had disclosed it to him throughout their journeys together. He could articulate with power regarding divine verdict because he had received it directly from the Creator's mouth. When individuals heard Enoch articulate, they weren't merely receiving human perspectives. They were receiving the very declarations of the Creator. However, the reaction to Enoch's cautions was predominantly what it has consistently been throughout Chronicles. Most individuals dismissed the declaration. They persisted in their corruption, ridiculing the concept of divine verdict, existing exclusively for immediate satisfaction and profit. They observed Enoch's uncomplicated lifestyle and rejected him as a religious extremist. They perceived his cautions as dangers from an individual who couldn't match their advanced society. Some individuals might have questioned themselves. If verdict is genuinely approaching, why hasn't it transpired yet? Enoch had been delivering messages regarding it for decades, even centuries, and still nothing had occurred. Certainly, this demonstrated that his cautions were inaccurate, that there was no divine being who would render verdict upon the planet. This perspective would be repeated thousands of years subsequently in 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 4, where mockers would declare, "Where is the covenant of his arrival? For since the ancestors have passed away, all matters persist as they were from formation's beginning." However, Enoch comprehended something that his detractors didn't. Divine timing is not human timing. The postponement in verdict wasn't evidence that it wouldn't arrive. It was evidence of divine patience and compassion. Every day that advanced without verdict was another day of favor, another chance for turning from sin. The divine wasn't delayed to accomplish his covenant. He was forbearing, not desiring that any should be destroyed, but that all should arrive at turning from sin. As the years of his prophetic calling accumulated, Enoch's spiritual development achieved remarkable levels. 3 centuries of journeying with the divine had revolutionized him into something unlike any other human being. He had absorbed divine understanding, mirrored divine nature, and transformed into a living demonstration of what humanity was intended to be. He was what Adam would have transformed into if transgression had never penetrated creation. This spiritual development wasn't merely intellectual understanding or emotional encounter. It was total revolution of his complete being. Enoch contemplated like the divine contemplated, experienced what the divine experienced, perceived creation through divine perspective. He had grown so harmonized with divine intention that his personal wishes had been entirely relinquished to his Maker's designs. He was genuinely an individual following the divine's personal spirit. Individuals could witness this revolution in everything regarding Enoch. The manner he articulated mirrored divine understanding. The manner he engaged others displayed divine affection. The manner he addressed challenges revealed divine tranquility. Even his adversaries couldn't dispute that there was something extraordinary regarding this individual who proclaimed to journey with the divine. His very being was witness to the authenticity of the Creator he honored. Enoch's standing circulated far beyond his immediate community. Throughout the ancient reality, individuals understood regarding the individual who journeyed with the divine. Some arrived from considerable distances merely to receive his words, to determine if the accounts regarding him were genuinely accurate. Others avoided him entirely, understanding that his being would declare them guilty of their transgressions and summon them to alter their methods. Among the godly, Enoch was honored as the most exceptional prophet who had previously existed. Here was an individual who didn't merely articulate regarding the divine. He genuinely journeyed and conversed with him daily. His declarations possessed the significance of direct divine disclosure. When Enoch declared, "Thus declares the Lord," individuals understood he signified it actually. He had recently concluded an exchange with the Creator. However, among the ungodly, Enoch's standing was considerably contrasting. They perceived him as a disruptor, an extremist, an individual whose severe cautions threatened their comfortable lifestyle. They resented his summons for turning from sin and his forecasts of approaching verdict. Some likely conspired against him, desiring to silence his voice indefinitely, but they couldn't affect him. He was beneath divine safeguarding. The division between how contrasting groups perceived Enoch discloses something significant regarding the character of spiritual reality. The identical declaration that delivered expectation to the godly delivered dread to the corrupt. The identical individual who was cherished by those who pursued the divine was despised by those who dismissed him. Enoch's existence and calling transformed into a dividing boundary that distinguished those who were genuinely pursuing the divine from those who were fleeing from him. This division wasn't something Enoch pursued or delighted in. His spirit's wish was to witness everyone arrive at turning from sin and discover deliverance. However, he had discovered from his journeys with the divine that not everyone would select to react to favor. Some individuals would persist in their defiance right up until the day verdict descended. This understanding saddened his spirit precisely as it saddened the divine spirit. However, it didn't prevent him from reliably conveying the declaration he had been provided. Throughout these 3 centuries, Enoch's standing as both a prophet and an individual of the divine transformed into legendary status. Accounts regarding his daily journeys with the Maker circulated throughout the recognized reality. Individuals would journey considerable distances merely to observe the individual who articulated face to face with the Creator. Some arrived pursuing understanding, others arrived anticipating miracles, and still others arrived merely out of inquisitiveness to determine if the remarkable accounts they had received could conceivably be accurate. The influence of Enoch's calling throughout these 300 years cannot be exaggerated. While the predominance of individuals dismissed his declaration and persisted in their corruption, there were consistently some who received his declarations and were revolutionized. Families who had been captured in the brutality and moral decay of their civilization discovered expectation through Enoch's delivering of messages. Young individuals who had been pursuing the destructive direction of their generation uncovered a superior method through his instruction. Enoch's influence likewise reached to the godly remnant, those offspring of Seth who were already pursuing to honor the divine. His demonstration revealed to them what was achievable in their bond with the Maker. His daily communion with the divine challenged them to pursue more profound intimacy with the Creator. His steadfast conviction facing adversity fortified their personal determination to advocate for godliness in a corrupt reality. However, perhaps the most important dimension of these 300 years was how they equipped Enoch for what was approaching next. Day following day, journey following journey, exchange following exchange, Enoch was being revolutionized into something transcending humanity. His spirit was growing so harmonized with the divine spirit that the separation between planet and paradise was starting to dissolve. He was existing progressively in divine presence, dedicating more time in the celestial domain than in the worldly one. As Enoch's 300 years of journeying with the divine persisted, something started transpiring that would establish the foundation for the most remarkable occurrence in human chronicles. The individual who had already surpassed ordinary human encounter was about to surpass human being itself. The prophet who had journeyed with the divine on the planet was about to journey with the divine in a manner that nobody had previously envisioned as achievable. Following 300 years of journeying with the divine, something unprecedented was about to transpire. The Almighty had been observing Enoch's reliable existence, his committed spirit, his steadfast submission. He had witnessed how this individual had selected communion with his Maker over all the satisfactions and accomplishments the reality could provide. And the divine reached a determination that had never been reached before in human chronicles. He would transport Enoch to paradise without permitting him to encounter mortality. This wasn't an instantaneous impulse or a secondary consideration. The Almighty had been orchestrating this remarkable occurrence from the start of Enoch's journey with him. Every exchange they had experienced, every movement they had completed together, every disclosure the divine had provided him, all of it had been advancing toward this instant. Enoch had transformed so intimate to the divine, so harmonized with his intention, so revolutionized by his being, that mortality seemed nearly unsuitable for such an individual. The determination to translate Enoch disclosed something exquisite regarding the divine spirit. He doesn't merely cherish humanity generally, he cherishes individuals profoundly and personally. The Almighty had cultivated such an intimate bond with Enoch that he couldn't endure the contemplation of their communion being disrupted even briefly by mortality. This was affection at its most genuine level, a Maker who treasured his companionship with one of his formed beings so intensely that he violated the ordinary regulations of human being. However, the divine's determination wasn't founded on partiality or random selection. Enoch had maintained an existence that was distinctively satisfying to his Maker. While everyone else was occupied with worldly endeavors, Enoch had established the divine as the foundation of his being. While others were constructing their personal dominions, Enoch was journeying in the divine's dominion. While creation was expanding more corrupt each day, Enoch was expanding more sacred through his daily fellowship with the Creator. The approach the divine selected for Enoch's departure was as remarkable as the determination itself. There would be no sickness, no mishap, no progressive deterioration. One instant, Enoch was journeying on the planet with the divine, and the subsequent instant, he was journeying in paradise with the divine. Genesis, chapter 5, verse 24, documents this incredible occurrence with uncomplicated yet profound declarations. And Enoch journeyed with the Almighty, and he was absent for the divine transported him. Those limited declarations contain one of the most astonishing statements in all holy writings. He was absent. What does that signify? It signifies that abruptly, without caution, Enoch merely wasn't present anymore. Individuals who had observed him that day would search for him and discover nothing. His family would investigate everywhere, but there would be no indication of him. Enoch had merely disappeared from the planet because the divine had transported him directly to paradise. Envision what this instant must have resembled for Enoch. He was likely experiencing one of his customary journeys with the divine, perhaps examining the condition of creation or obtaining fresh revelations regarding the future. Then, abruptly, instead of coming back home as typical, he discovered himself in a location more magnificent than anything he had previously envisioned. He was still journeying with the divine, but now he was in the divine's personal domain, encompassed by paradise's splendor itself. The biblical record of Enoch's vanishing is intentionally concise, but that conciseness makes it even more forceful. There's no elaborate characterization of brilliant illuminations or theatrical extraordinary occurrences. There's no record of Enoch being equipped for what was about to transpire or expressing farewell to his family. The scriptures merely declare the reality. The divine transported him. It was as organic and uncomplicated as that, because for Enoch, the separation between planet and paradise had already transformed very delicate. This abrupt vanishing would have been startling to everyone who understood Enoch. His family members would have anticipated him to arrive home from his daily journey with the divine, but he never came back. His companions and adherents would have searched for him everywhere, incapable of comprehending what had transpired. Investigation groups would have been arranged, every conceivable location would have been examined, but there would be no remains to discover, no clarification that was reasonable according to ordinary human encounter. The author of Hebrews provides us perspective into what enabled Enoch's translation achievable. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5 records, "By conviction, Enoch was transported away so that he did not witness mortality and was not discovered because the divine had transported him. For before his translation, he possessed this witness that he satisfied the divine." The essential term here is conviction. Enoch's remarkable bond with the divine was constructed on remarkable conviction. However, what manner of conviction was this? It wasn't merely having belief that the divine exists. Even the demonic forces have belief in that and shudder. Enoch's conviction was the manner that entirely relied upon the divine with every dimension of his existence. It was conviction that selected to journey with the divine, even when the remainder of creation was journeying away from him. It was conviction that maintained belief in divine covenants, even when there was no perceptible proof that they would be accomplished. Enoch's conviction was likewise profoundly personal and relational. He didn't merely have belief in the divine, he had belief in the divine's character. He relied upon the divine's nature, depended on divine understanding, and relinquished to divine intention. His conviction wasn't founded on what he could obtain from the divine, but on who the divine was. This manner of conviction organically resulted in the manner of intimate bond that rendered translation not merely achievable, but nearly unavoidable. The text particularly mentions that Enoch satisfied the divine. This is a remarkable statement when you contemplate it. Here was a human being whose existence was so harmonized with divine intention, whose spirit was so relinquished to his Maker, whose daily selections were so reliably correct that he genuinely satisfied the limitless, flawless, sacred divine. This wasn't regarding executing religious obligations or adhering to regulations. This was regarding a bond that delivered happiness to the divine spirit. What satisfied the divine regarding Enoch wasn't his flawlessness, but his commitment. It wasn't that he never committed errors, but that he never ceased pursuing the divine. It wasn't that he possessed all the solutions, but that he relied upon the one who did. The divine was satisfied with Enoch because Enoch established the divine as the emphasis of his existence, the foundation of his contemplations, the concentration of his devotions. The influence of Enoch's abrupt vanishing on his peers would have been tremendous. Here was an individual who had been a perpetual being in their community for over 3 centuries, and abruptly he was absent without indication. The astonishment would have circulated throughout the recognized reality as information of his vanishing journeyed from family to family, from urban center to urban center. For those who had dismissed Enoch's declaration and ridiculed his cautions, his translation would have been profoundly disturbing. They had rejected him as a religious extremist. However, now they had to contend with the reality that something extraordinary had transpired to him. His vanishing couldn't be clarified by organic causes, and this compelled them to contemplate whether his declaration regarding divine verdict might genuinely be accurate. Some of the ungodly might have attempted to formulate organic clarifications for Enoch's vanishing. Perhaps he had descended into a waterway and been transported away, or perhaps untamed creatures had terminated him and dispersed his remains. However, as days transformed into weeks and weeks transformed into months, with no indication of him being discovered, these clarifications would have appeared progressively feeble and unconvincing. For the godly remnant who had maintained belief in Enoch's declaration and pursued his demonstration, his translation would have been both inspiring and challenging. It inspired them because it demonstrated that their conviction was not without purpose. The divine genuinely compensated those who pursued him reliably. However, it likewise challenged them to assess their personal existences and inquire whether they were journeying as intimately with the divine as Enoch had. The information of Enoch's translation would have circulated to every region of the planet, transported by merchants, journeyers, and narrative tellers. In an era when most individuals never journeyed distant from their origin location, the account of the individual who had vanished because the divine transported him would have been the most remarkable information anyone had previously received. Some would maintain belief immediately. Others would require persuasion, and still others would dismiss it entirely. However, regardless of how individuals reacted to the information, one matter was inevitable: nobody could disregard it. Enoch's translation had generated a sensation that would be discussed for successive generations. It had revealed in the most theatrical manner achievable that the divine Enoch honored was authentic, forceful, and intimately participating in human matters. The individual who had dedicated his existence journeying with the divine had supplied the supreme evidence of divine being and his affection for those who pursue him. The influence of Enoch's translation reached beyond merely the immediate astonishment and amazement. It functioned as a forceful validation of everything he had delivered during his centuries of calling. His cautions regarding approaching verdict, his summons for turning from sin, his covenants regarding divine reliability, all of these acquired fresh significance and pressing nature in consideration of his extraordinary departure from the planet. Those who had been uncertain regarding Enoch's declaration now had to reach a determination. His translation was like the divine's personal endorsement on everything Enoch had articulated and accomplished. It was heavenly verification of his prophetic calling, evidence that he had genuinely been journeying and conversing with the Creator. There could be no additional justifications, no additional postponements, no additional regarding his cautions as simple human conjecture. The translation likewise functioned as a glimpse of what the divine had in preparation for all who journeyed reliably with him. Enoch's encounter demonstrated that mortality was not the conclusion, that there was something transcending this existence, that the Almighty possessed the capacity to transport his people to himself. While others would have to anticipate until following mortality to encounter paradise, Enoch had been provided a particular glimpse that revealed the divine's supreme design. For Enoch's family, his vanishing would have been both devastating and motivating. The witness Enoch, abandoned for future successive generations, was unlike anything creation had previously witnessed. His existence transformed into living evidence that it was achievable for human beings to maintain intimate communion with their Maker. Every account told regarding him, every recollection conveyed by those who had understood him, every record of his daily journeys with the divine transformed into a symbol of expectation for individuals who questioned if they too could encounter that manner of bond with the Creator. Enoch's witness wasn't constructed on theatrical supernatural acts or magnificent exhibitions of force. It was constructed on something far more significant: reliable, devoted daily fellowship with the divine over the duration of centuries. Individuals could indicate his existence and declare, Here was an individual precisely like us, who selected to establish the divine as the foundation of his being and observe what transpired. His demonstration revealed that remarkable spiritual encounters weren't allocated for a particular category of individuals, but were accessible to anyone prepared to pursue the divine with their complete spirit. The accounts of Enoch's translation would be transmitted from generation to successive generation, transforming more invaluable with each recounting. Parents would share with their offspring regarding the individual who journeyed so intimately with the divine that the Almighty transported him to paradise without perishing. Grandparents would convey with their descendants the remarkable record of how Enoch merely vanished one day because his communion with the divine had grown so intimate that even mortality couldn't disrupt it. These accounts functioned a vital purpose in the pre-deluge reality. As circumstances deteriorated and corruption expanded, individuals required expectation. They required to understand that the divine was still authentic, still participating, still caring regarding human beings. Enoch's witness supplied that expectation. It reminded individuals that regardless of how shadowed creation transformed, there was consistently the achievability of journeying with the divine, of encountering his being, of maintaining an existence that satisfied him. However, Enoch's witness wasn't merely regarding individual expectation. It was likewise a caution. His translation functioned as a glimpse of the verdict that was approaching. If the divine could extraordinarily remove one individual from the planet, he could certainly deliver extraordinary verdict upon the planet. Enoch's vanishing was both a revelation of divine affection for the godly and a testament of his capacity to act conclusively in human chronicles. The influence Enoch maintained on the pre-deluge reality reached far beyond his personal lifetime. His son Methuselah transformed into a living countdown to the deluge, and everyone understood it. Every year that Methuselah existed was a year of favor, a year when individuals could still turn from sin and redirect to the divine. The very being of Methuselah was a perpetual testament of Enoch's prophetic calling and the verdict he had forecast. Noah himself would have matured, receiving accounts regarding his great-grandfather Enoch, the individual who would ultimately construct the vessel and deliver humanity from the deluge, possessed a direct family link to the individual who had journeyed with the divine and been translated to paradise. This link wasn't happenstance. It was portion of the divine's design to preserve not merely human existence, but likewise the understanding of what it signified to journey with the divine. Through Noah's ancestry, the witness of Enoch would endure the deluge and be transmitted to all future successive generations. The understanding that an individual had once journeyed so intimately with the divine that he never encountered mortality would be conserved for all humanity. This witness would function as both motivation and challenge to every generation that pursued. The New Testament authors distinctly comprehended the importance of Enoch's existence and translation. The book of Hebrews positions Enoch prominently in its renowned Hall of Conviction chapter. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 5, records, "By conviction, Enoch was transported away so that he did not witness mortality and was not discovered because the divine had transported him. For before his translation, he possessed this witness that he satisfied the divine." What's exceptional regarding this New Testament citation is how it links Enoch's translation directly to his conviction. The author of Hebrews doesn't characterize Enoch's encounter as something mystical or inexplicable, but as the organic consequence of a conviction-saturated existence. This link demonstrates that Enoch's translation wasn't a random, extraordinary occurrence, but the reasonable consequence of an existence maintained in total reliance and submission to the divine. The verse that pursues in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 6 is similarly important, but without conviction, it is unachievable to satisfy the divine. For he who approaches the divine must maintain belief that he exists and that he is a compensator of those who persistently pursue him. This statement manifests immediately following the characterization of Enoch's translation. indicating that Enoch's existence flawlessly demonstrates what it signifies to maintain the manner of conviction that satisfies the divine. Jude likewise cites Enoch in his letter, but he concentrates on Enoch's prophetic calling rather than his translation. Jude, verses 14 and 15 document, "Now Enoch, seventh from Adam, delivered prophecies regarding these individuals, likewise declaring, 'Behold, the Lord arrives with tens of thousands of his holy ones to carry out verdict upon all, to declare guilty all who are ungodly among them, of all their ungodly actions, which they have performed in an ungodly manner, and of all the severe utterances which ungodly transgressors have articulated against him.'" This citation demonstrates that Enoch's prophetic calling maintained enduring importance far beyond his personal period. The verdict he forecast wasn't merely regarding the deluge. It was regarding the supreme verdict when the Lord himself would come back to the planet. Enoch had perceived thousands of years into the future and delivered prophecies regarding occurrences that would influence all of human chronicles. The reality that New Testament authors incorporated these citations to Enoch demonstrates how significant his witness remained even thousands of years following his translation. His existence persisted to function as demonstration of what was achievable when human beings selected to journey intimately with the divine. His conviction persisted to challenge and motivate individuals to pursue that identical manner of intimate bond with their Maker. Enoch's persisting demonstration of intimate communion with the divine has articulated to innumerable successive generations of adherents throughout Chronicles. In every era, when individuals have questioned whether it's genuinely achievable to understand the divine personally, they could observe back to Enoch's demonstration and discover inspiration. Here was an individual who didn't merely maintain belief in the divine or worship the divine from distance. He genuinely journeyed and conversed with the divine as a companion. This demonstration has been especially forceful during periods of spiritual shadow or oppression. When adherents have confronted adversity for their conviction, they could recall Enoch, who existed reliably in a reality that was swiftly redirecting away from the divine. When individuals have questioned whether their daily commitment to the divine genuinely matters, they could contemplate Enoch, whose daily journeys with the divine ultimately resulted in his translation to paradise. Enoch's existence likewise supplies expectation for the future. His translation was a glimpse of what anticipates all who journey reliably with the divine. While most individuals will encounter physical mortality, Enoch's demonstration demonstrates that mortality is not the conclusion. There is something transcending this existence, and the divine possesses the capacity to transport his people to himself. 1 Thessalonians chapter 4 verse 17 articulates a future time when living adherents will be transported upward to encounter the Lord, an occurrence that resonates Enoch's translation. The functional implications of Enoch's demonstration are significant. He reveals to us that it's achievable to exist in this reality without being dominated by its principles and emphases. He reveals that daily communion with the divine can revolutionize an ordinary individual into someone remarkable. He demonstrates that the divine compensates those who pursue him persistently, not unavoidably with material provisions, but with something far more invaluable, intimate bond with the universe's maker. Perhaps most significantly, Enoch's existence reminds us that the supreme objective of human being isn't achievement, riches, recognition, or accomplishment. It's communion with the divine. Everything else in existence is fleeting, but the bond we construct with our Maker endures indefinitely. Enoch uncovered this reality early in his existence and committed himself entirely to nurturing that bond. The consequence was an existence so satisfying to the divine that mortality itself was surpassed. Today, thousands of years following Enoch journeyed the planet. His demonstration persists to challenge and motivate. In a reality that frequently appears as shadowed and corrupt as the one Enoch existed in, his witness reminds us that it's still achievable to journey with the divine. His translation provides us expectation that this existence is not all there exists, and his prophecies remind us that the divine will supremely triumph over all wickedness. The individual who journeyed with the divine persists to indicate the direction for all who wish to pursue in his movements. If this remarkable account of conviction, communion, and divine companionship has affected your spirit, I inspire you to subscribe to our channel for more astonishing biblical accounts that will fortify your conviction and intensify your bond with the divine. Select that notification indicator so you never overlook when we upload fresh content that can revolutionize your spiritual voyage. And please don't preserve this remarkable account to yourself. Convey this video with your family, companions, and anyone who requires to receive regarding the expectation and achievability that arrives from journeying with the divine. Together, we can circulate these timeless realities that possess the capacity to transform existences and attract individuals nearer to their Maker. Thank you for accompanying me on this voyage through Enoch's exceptional existence. Until subsequent time, may you be motivated to journey intimately with the divine, precisely as Enoch did thousands of years ago. Divine blessings.